When the message first arrived, no one on Earth understood why an empire spanning 1,000 light years would ask for help from a young world still climbing out of its own shadows. The plea carried urgency in every pulse of its transmission, and the diplomats who decoded it spent hours debating its meaning. Yet the core request was simple. The coalition beyond the Orion Gate begged for soldiers. They begged for warriors strong enough to confront the threat that stalked their systems. The coalition called them the Void Renders, though even that name felt too soft for what the enemy represented. They were destroyers of worlds, erasers of cultures, and tormentors of any civilization too weak to resist. The coalition claimed they needed Earth's disciplined armies. What they received was something else entirely. The Council of Earth met in silence for hours. On one side were the old generals, calm and precise. On the other side are representatives from the darker branches of Earth's history, branches no one talked about, yet all governments kept in reserve. They were operatives shaped by crisis, raised in the ashes of forgotten conflicts, and trained to operate where armies could not. Their methods were never meant for open fields or peaceful skies. They were made for nightmares. One general finally asked the room a single question. If these void renders had devoured whole nations across the stars, what hope did disciplined battalions have? In that silence, someone suggested something no one wanted to say aloud. Earth had soldiers, yes, but it also had killers. And if the void renders were as merciless as the message warned, maybe mercy had no role in this war. Across the globe, hidden units were activated. They had many names over the decades, but now they were simply identified as the Ghost Line. Their members had no records, no official ranks, and no history recognized by open governments. Each member had survived training few humans could endure. They moved not with pride, but with purpose. They were not chosen by virtue, but by capability. They did not win medals because their battles were never meant to be known. When their transports rose through the sky toward the coalition rendezvous point, no public farewell marked their departure. Only a handful of watchers stood behind reinforced glass, unsure whether they were sending a rescue force or unleashing something the galaxy would one day fear even more. The coalition flagship waited above the edge of a red dwarf system. Its decks teemed with officers from dozens of species. They expected disciplined ranks of Earth's finest, clean uniforms, shining equipment, and soldiers who followed predictable patterns of organization. Instead, the ramp of Earth's vessel opened, and a small group descended with quiet steps. They wore no identical armor. Their gear looked mismatched, worn, and almost primitive to the coalition. Their eyes, however, made every officer freeze. The eyes carried a stillness that did not belong to soldiers. It belonged to predators. The coalition commander, a tall figure named Halloran, stepped forward with ceremonial confidence. He offered formal greetings, but grew uneasy as none of the humans saluted. They only observed everything around them with careful calculation. Halloran introduced himself and asked who led them. A man stepped forward. His name was Rowland. His voice held no hostility and no warmth. He told Halloran the Ghost Line did not use traditional command hierarchies during active deployment. They operated as a unified front. Halloran nodded politely, though confusion flickered across his features. He attempted to describe the Void Renders, but Rowland quietly interrupted. They already knew. They had studied every available report during the journey. They wanted to see the front lines. Halloran led them through the ship toward a tactical chamber. The Ghost Line moved silently behind him. The coalition officers whispered to each other, uncertain if Earth had misunderstood their request. The coalition had wanted soldiers capable of coordinated defense and precise strategic operations. Yet these humans did not look like personnel meant to defend. They looked like forces meant to erase threats entirely. Inside the tactical chamber, holograms hovered above a circular platform. They displayed broken planets darkened by scars, orbital stations collapsed inward, and fleets shattered into drifting metal. Halloran explained that the void renders advanced system by system, demolishing every sign of culture. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They did not respond to logic or plea. The coalition forces resisted, but suffered loss after loss. For every battle, one they lost two more. Their enemy was relentless. Rowland studied the holograms with his team. One member, a woman named Lyra, pointed to a pattern in the debris fields. Halloran leaned in, trying to understand what she saw. She explained the renders preferred to strike from folded space entry points that repeated every cycle. Earth had observed similar patterns in old atmospheric warfare, where ambush timing defined survival. Another member named Darren analyzed trajectory clusters and calculated potential interception coordinates. Halloran blinked in surprise. Earth's operatives grasped coalition data faster than most of his own analysts. The coalition soon discovered the Ghost Line did not rest. They spent every hour reviewing data, constructing predictive models, and preparing unconventional methods none of the coalition generals would ever approve. Halloran grew uneasy, though he also felt something else he had not felt in months. He felt hope. When the first engagement began, the coalition fleet positioned itself along a defensive barrier. Their ships formed elegant lines of shimmering hulls. The void renders emerged from folded space like shadows given form. Their vessels were jagged constructs, etched with impossible geometries. Energy storms surged from their cores. The coalition fired coordinated volleys, but their first line wavered as the renders advanced with terrifying speed. Halloran turned to order a retreat when he noticed Earth's shipbreak formation. Rowland and the Ghost Line launched with a precision that contradicted their disorganized appearance. Their small vessel darted between render ships. It released swarms of microcharges and interference clouds that destabilized the enemy's energy fields. Darren directed pulses that scrambled targeting patterns. Lyra initiated a cascade of decoys that replicated human life signs. Render ships shifted erratically, attacking false targets, while the Ghost Line moved like a blade through fog. The coalition officers watched in astonishment. The Ghost Line did not fight like soldiers. Soldiers defended, protected, and safeguarded. These humans hunted. They maneuvered with fearless aggression. Their tactics resembled primal strategy honed with modern technology. Their vessel carried modifications Halloran had never seen. When render boarding spikes attempted to pierce the hull, the humans countered with internal traps that neutralized intruders instantly. They advanced through the enemy formation, while coalition ships struggled to maintain distance. In the heart of the battle, Rowland ordered deployment of something the coalition had never encountered. A containment prism unfolded from their ship. It expanded into a field that disrupted folded space. The renders suddenly lost their ability to retreat. They were trapped. The Ghost Line then executed an attack pattern later, described by witness reports as a storm of precision destruction. Within minutes, the first wave of renders collapsed into drifting fragments. When the battle ended, the coalition flagship remained silent. Halloran approached the humans as they returned. His voice trembled as he asked how they developed such methods. Rowland replied that Earth had faced countless crises in its early age. Humanity had encountered trauma, chaos, and conflict across centuries. Soldiers learned to protect, but some had learned to end threats before they grew. He reminded Halloran that Earth never intended to send ideal heroes. They sent the ones who understood ruthless enemies, because Earth itself had raised them in eras where survival demanded it. Word spread across the coalition. Some celebrated Earth as a savior. Others whispered with fear. They said the humans did not simply defeat their enemy. They dismantled the renders with eerie efficiency. Requests poured in for Earth's help in other systems, Yet Rowland insisted his team would not scatter. They moved as one. They traveled toward the central render cluster, where the enemy gathered for a final strike. The journey took weeks. Along the way, the coalition learned more about these humans. They did not boast about their victories. They did not smile in triumph. Their focus never wavered. They studied enemy behavior, trained in silent routines, and maintained discipline that felt almost unnatural. Halloran attempted conversation with Lyra one evening. He asked if Earth feared what the coalition might think of their methods. She answered calmly, "In dire wars, all that mattered was survival. If victory required actions pleasant diplomats could not stomach, then Earth sent those who accepted the burden without complaint." As they neared the Render stronghold, the coalition saw the scale of the threat. A massive labyrinth of blackened stations covered in energy veins surrounded a fractured star. The Renders had created something like a hive across the orbit. Energy spikes erupted at random intervals. Countless ships patrolled the perimeter. Halloran's voice shook as he explained no fleet had ever returned from attempting to breach it. Rowland observed the layout and asked about the star's instability. Darren immediately began calculations. He discovered the Renders relied on harnessing the unstable core. That meant one vulnerability existed. The Ghost Line developed a plan so dangerous to Coalit